I invite Comrade Sridhar Ramachudi to deliver his inaugural speech for the 2016 EMS Smriti. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Biju. Comrades on the dais, Radhakrishnan, Thrissur CPIM Secretary, Comrade Muralidharan, who has been the chief coordinator of this entire program, Comrade Sudhakar Reddy, General Secretary of the CPI, Professor Sachidanandan, Professor Gopal Guru, Medha Patkar, and least of all, last not the least, Professor Prabhakar Naik, who I had the occasion to confess the last time I was here, that Comrade Prabhat taught me economics formally in Jawaharlal Nehru University and many other things subsequently, so we are good friend and comrade. So I feel a little hesitant and intimidated to speak before your former teachers. But nevertheless, I'm very happy to be here at the 2016 EMS Smriti and to inaugurate it on a theme that you have set out today for a new agenda for reclaiming secular democracy. The idea of India, a new agenda. There is a written paper that the organizers had asked me, so that's prepared, it must be circulated. Hopefully you will all get it, so I do not propose to read that paper, but the essence of what I wanted to say in that paper, I'll try to recapitulate briefly. Idea of India. Now what is this idea of India? You have the RSS ideologues and the BJP saying this is a metaphysical concept. You only have an idea in your mind, but that is not Indian reality. But we maintain, no, the idea of India is the product of the people's struggle in our country for our independence and a product of the coming together of such a large diversity, different nationalities, different linguistic groups, different cultures, different ethnic groups. I mean, it's a mind-boggling diversity which doesn't exist in any other country in the world that we know of today. That all these people came together in the epic struggle for our freedom is something that cannot be discounted and brushed away as a metaphysical concept. Historians today testify that the last 3 decades of our freedom struggle, the scale of people's participation in that freedom movement was something that cannot be explained unless there was a vision that was motivating them. It may have been a very embryonic vision in its beginnings, but it was nevertheless a vision that brought together people who otherwise have been separated through cultures, through languages, through history, through tradition, through religions, all of them coming together into one momentous struggle. What was it that motivated them? And that is what should be defined, I think. That's why I would go by that definition, is that what motivated this entire movement for the struggle was the idea of India. Now, what is this idea of India? To put it in a nutshell, I mean, there are many multiple complexities of it. When occasions come, we can discuss those various aspects. To put it in a nutshell, it represents the idea that India as a country, as a multinational country, moves towards transcending its immense diversities in favor of a substantial, inclusive unity of its people. By unity of its people, what should be understood is not merely an economic, social or a cultural unity, but unity in terms of equality, fraternity and liberty, which ultimately find reflection in the constitution that was drafted at that time. That unity amongst all the people inhabiting this country to arrive at that sort of a economic and social conditions that will permit such a unity to be established. That is the actual idea of India, as I would consider it. An idea that is still not realized. And that is the battle today. That is an idea that is not yet realized, but it is an idea that was born out of the people's struggles for the freedom. But by this idea emerging, the second major point that I'd like to make, by this idea emerging, the Indian national movement had actually broken away from the traditional concept of the birth of the nation state. Recollect, the nation state was a product of the triumph of capitalism over feudalism. The nation state emerged when there were no longer rulers with divine sanction, emperors and kings, and the subjects. The nation state emerged with the establishment of the concept of a citizen, no longer ruler subject but a citizen. And this nation state, with it was born the concept of nationalism. And this nationalism was ingrained, and this is all part of the mid-17th century treaties which are called the Westphalia peace or the Westphalia peace system, and the feudal kingdoms were fighting with each other and capitalism was rising, overcoming them. And then the concept of nationalism that emerged from the emergence of the nation state was that a majority will exercise its domination over a minority. I mean, you have numerous examples world over, whether it's the Jews, it's the Arabs, it's the Irish. I mean, you can take various examples the world over how this happened. But we in India rejected that Westphalia concept of a nation state. Not of a majority and a minority, and a majoritarianism being nationalism and the minoritarianism being anti-nationalism. But we came up with the concept of equality of all its citizens, at least formally, legalistically in the constitution, and that itself was a break from that conception. So the Indian state, so to speak, that emerged after the freedom struggle had in its embryo the vision of this sort of an idea of India, where we move towards an inclusivity, overcoming the diversity which will remain and which should remain. The basic point, I think, here is the conception arose by saying that the unity and integrity of this diversity in India can be maintained only by strengthening the bonds of commonality that are there within this diversity, which the freedom struggle forged, and not by imposing a uniformity on this diversity. And in this context, if you look at it, what the BJP and the Commonwealth forces today are saying is actually a throwback to the Westphalia concept of a nation state. They talk in terms of a majority versus the minority. They talk in terms of imposing a uniformity upon the diversity that we have in India. They talk about the conception of nationalism, which is majority nationalism. That's reflected on all the slogans they give today, like Bharat Mata Ki Jai. Jai Hind is not as a symbol of nationalism as Bharat Mata Ki Jai is for the RSS and the BJP. So ingrained in all this is the concept of this majoritarianism versus minoritarianism. The idea of India transcends that. And this, I'll come to that later. But this is a conception where I said why in the embryonic stage it was there at the time of the independence was because in one way or the other, you had a lot of the important leaders of our national movement who talked about this idea in various forms. Take Ambedkar, for example. Take Ambedkar's that famous speech when he presents the draft constitution to the Constituent Assembly. In 1949, 25th of November, if I remember, that's not part of the paper. But when he presents that speech, there he says very categorically and clearly that what we have created today, the political structure, is based on equality, in the sense that we have given one person. Remember, we accepted universal adult suffrage in India at the time of independence. At that time, it would appear to be a very revolutionary step, when many European democracies had not given universal right for voting to everybody, particularly women in many of those countries. But we did it at that time. And what did Ambedkar say? We have given one person one vote, and we have given one vote one value. But we have not created a society where there is one person, one value. The vote has the same value, but the person does not have the same value. Until that contradiction is overcome, this political structure itself will be vulnerable and can be torn asunder. In fact, he says that all the laborious work we have done in erecting this structure can be torn asunder if this contradiction is not removed at the earliest. I'll come to that later. The question of the caste question and the caste discrimination, how that prevented this unity and prevents today the unity of this conception of this idea of India. But the point here to be understood is that this is the unfolding of the idea of India, which is not yet realized. The task today is to realize that idea of India. And in this unfolding of this idea of India, naturally disputes arose. And from the 1920s, I think a little digression into history is important to understand this point properly in today's context. In the decade of the 1920s, three visions emerged during our freedom struggle on what should be the character of modern India, of modern independent India. What should be independent India's character? The mainstream, the Congress vision, spoke in terms of a secular democratic republic. The left, an important element in the formation of this idea of India, spoke of the point saying that the secular democratic republic in itself is not an objective that can unify our country and our people and give prosperity to all. Secular democratic republic, yes, but the political independence of India must be extended to mean the economic independence of every Indian. And that is possible only under socialism. And this was a vision that came through the process of history. In the process of this unification or the inclusiveness of this diversity that we are talking about, three important things played a major role, and all three of them, the left has played a major role in them. First was this entire question of the struggles against feudal landlord oppression in our country. Whether it's Punapravailar in Kerala, the Tebaga movement in Bengal, the Varli tribal struggle in Maharashtra, whether it was Surma Valley struggle in Assam, whether it was the Betterment Levy struggle in Punjab, all these, and the pinnacle of that was the armed uprising and the armed struggle in Telangana. All these struggles together during the period of independence brought to the agenda of independence the question of land and land reforms. The abolition of zamindari, something which Mahatma Gandhi didn't initially agree. But the abolition of zamindari was forced by these movements led by the communists in our country. And that came onto the agenda, which was a very important element in creating this inclusiveness that we are speaking about in this idea of India. The second was that what would be the political map of a multinational country like India, with so many different linguistic nationalities. Nehru, recollect, soon after independence, was toying with the idea of A, B, C, D states. He says states should be divided according to your administrative needs. But as against that concept, that was a complete non-recognition of the Indian reality, of this multinational reality of India. What was the communists and the left's answer? Whether it was Sangyukta Maharashtra in Maharashtra, whether it was Aikya Kerala in Kerala, or Vishal Andhra in Andhra Pradesh, it was the communists that spearheaded the struggle for the linguistic reorganizations of the states. And that linguistic reorganization gave that feeling of confidence and at least a formal equality of various linguistic nationalities in the political map of modern India. So the integration of India in terms of its nationalities on the basis of equality of each one for each one of these diversities was something that the left was instrumental in contributing. The third aspect of this, which is currently what concerns us most today, was the left's concept of secularism. What was the left's answer? What we continue to say even today, secularism should mean in India the complete separation of politics from religion. It's not only separation of state from religion, it's the separation of politics from religion. Yes, religion is the individual right of every individual. That is the right that will be respected, must be respected. And any attacks on that must be defended and people protected. But the state shall not proclaim a religion or profess a religion. Instead, what was the concept that the Indian to-be ruling classes were advancing? That secularism means equality of all religions. That is what is today also the official policy. Equality of all religions. In a country of our diversity, with at least 4 of the 6 religions being born in these lands that we have here, equality of all religions inherently has a bias towards the majority religion. Inherently, in a society when it starts working, there is a bias towards the majority religion. And this laid the basis at the ground and the foundation for the communal forces to keep raising their ugly head, threatening the entire secular democratic order of this republic. So when the left played that role and continues to play this role on saying that this is the definition of secularism that is essential for the idea of India to be realized, that is the battle that continued since then till even now. So as opposed to these two visions of the left and the communists, which I had spoken of, secular democratic republic, extending it to the political independence to economic independence, that can happen only under socialism, which was the left vision. As opposed to this, there was a third vision that emerged during the freedom struggle. A vision that had a twin expression. And that vision was that the character of independent India would be determined by the religious affiliation of its people. You had, as a result of this conception, you had one expression of the Muslim League talking about the Islamic State. You had the twin expression of the RSS talking about the Hindu Rashtra. And both these are also products that emerged during the period of the freedom struggle. So the battle between those three visions then during the freedom struggle and what we are seeing today, in a sense, is a continuation of that battle. And here, an important point that needs to be understood for the future, how to realize this idea of India, that if the RSS vision was defeated at the time of our independence, if that defeat was the reason why, out of frustration, you had the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi and the various activities of the RSS at that point of time, why is it that they are able to raise their heads again today? Because the battle never ended then. At the time of independence, proclaiming ourselves in our constitution of a secular democratic republic and talking about various illusions for the people, saying that there will be equality, economic equality, that the Congress and the Indian ruling classes then did. At the same time, the manner in which they could not provide that equality that Ambedkar was also talking about, not only the left, that laid the basis and foundation for these communal forces to once again rise. And why did this happen? Because the Indian ruling classes post-independence were the Indian bourgeoisie and the landlords led by the big bourgeoisie, who were seeking capitalist development in India, but seeking capitalist development, not in the classical capitalist development, on the ruins of feudalism, not by eliminating feudalism, but in collaboration with feudalism. They were their class partner. And not by breaking the links with foreign capital and imperialism, but again by increasingly collaborating with foreign finance capital. So these limitations of the capitalist development in India had their reflection in the social and the cultural aspects as well. We have always argued what were these limitations from the economics point of view. But in terms of the social and cultural point of view, what did it mean? Not eliminating feudalism and building capitalism on its ruins meant, but building capitalism along with landlords in an effort to try and convert the feudal landlord into the capitalist landlord, which is the process that is still going on in many parts of the country. But in the process, what happened? The non-overthrow of feudalism meant and means today the continuation of the social consciousness that is associated with feudalism, a consciousness that is dominated both by caste and by religion, that continued to exist in our society. And not only did it continue to exist, but it became an instrument for gaining political power through democratic elections, where instead of an entire attack for the elimination of the caste system and the caste factor, caste considerations became an important element in the electoral considerations of the political parties, which sustained, not merely sustained, but actually have given the opportunity for caste-based political mobilization, which is what we are seeing all over North India today. Whether you see the Jat agitation in Haryana recently or the politics of UP and Bihar. Therefore, the question of caste and the caste-associated caste oppression, far from being eliminated, continue to be an important element of the people's social consciousness. And on the other hand, the distorted capitalist development that happened because of collaboration with foreign finance capital has led to now, at the stage of this globalized capitalist development, a level of social consciousness that is dominated by consumerism and by the various values we talk of under globalization. So what we have in our society is a lethal combination of these two elements. The feudal vestiges in terms of social consciousness of the caste and the religious influences, and the degenerative effects of this type of capitalist development, which are combined in the social consciousness of the people. Now, this sort of a situation is conducive for the communal forces to thrive. A, for this reason, and B, because of the very type of capitalist development, that conception of equality that was promised at the time of independence receded very fast, and for a large majority of our people, it was and remains today a situation of increased exploitation and greater and greater economic burdens on them. The resultant discontent amongst the people is the basis for which, on which the common forces have capitalized, continue to capitalize at every point of time. So unless the basic problems are solved, you cannot really fully realize completely comprehensively the idea of India that we are talking about. So this conditions we must understand in today's context, and therefore when you talk about eliminating this sort of a consciousness was dominated by caste and other feudal or semi-capitalist consciousness. How does one tackle, for the sake of realizing this idea of India, the question of caste oppression today? Caste oppression today is not something of an abstract notion, but is the reality. Every day today you have this obnoxious caste oppression, and particularly the Dalits and the most backward of the backward caste. Now this, for the left and for all of us and for the progressive forces, means that along with the questions of economic exploitation, the questions of social oppression should also be simultaneous agenda of the left and progressive forces, without which this problem cannot be addressed. In the final analysis, caste oppression cannot be changed due to a change of heart. Caste oppression will have to end through the economic empowerment of the marginalized and the Dalits. And that economic empowerment can only come through a vision that talks about economic independence of our people, that is socialism, that the left is talking about. Therefore, these two elements have to be ingrained. It's a tautology to say that in India, class struggle stands on two legs: economic exploitation and social oppression. And unless both the legs are strong enough, we can't even start walking, leave alone running. So this is an important element that all of us will have to undertake in order to realize this vision. But in the absence of realizing those visions, the communal forces thrive and they mount the offensive that they are mounting today. So the battle for the Hindu Rashtra, that mistakenly was thought was defeated at the time of independence, never defeated but continued to aspire for it, while Muslim League got its part through partition of the country in the Pakistan. The RSS effort to transform our country, this secular democratic republic, as our constitution says, into their conception of a Hindu Rashtra, is a fascistic project based on rabidly intolerant society and state structure they want to build. We can already see all that happening in various areas today under this Modi BJP government. You've seen now suddenly, we heard the song Azadi, and we've gone back to the JNU movement. Kanhaiya should be here. He should also be part of this program, I think, tomorrow or one of these days, in one of the sessions. Now they have suddenly come up saying that the tapes that were taped at that point of time, which were shown to be doctored in the courts, now the government has come and said, no, the tapes are genuine. And therefore they are saying that all the people identified in the tapes must be arrested. A new round of attack on JNU is imminent. And this is happening in all the institutions of higher education, to the higher education itself. The appointments that they are making, the sort of changes in syllabus that they are trying to do, the sort of attacks on universities, which is a very important element, what Prabhat had talked of saying an assault on thought. An assault on thought that is being mounted today. Now that is one aspect of it. But the changes that are being made to the parliamentary system in our country also have a very, very profound, dangerous implication for the future. Parliamentary institutions and mechanisms that were traditionally accepted for the last 60 years are all being changed today. If you don't have a majority in the Rajya Sabha, get the Speaker of the Lok Sabha to declare that a particular bill is a money bill, and if it's a money bill, Rajya Sabha becomes irrelevant. The Aadhaar bill was passed as a money bill. I mean, this is the sort of manipulations that are being done. Then you have this authoritarian streak of what you've seen in Uttarakhand. What is the strategy they have employed in the recent state assembly elections? That in the states, to make sure that there is no national party presence, ally with the regional parties, and because regional parties will have to be at their mercy of the central government, because of the weakening of the federal structure. So you could go with the AJP and the Bodos in Assam and try and eliminate the presence of national parties in various states. And for that, the use of money power that distorts the democratic choices of our people. So you have today a phase of rapid communalization. You've seen what's happening in Dadri, the village, Dadri village now. After 9 months, a forensic laboratory of theirs has now shown, apparently, that what was decided upon as meat in that Akhlaq's house who was murdered, after 9 months they say that meat is beef. And therefore, since a cow weighs 150 kilos, many people must have eaten that beef. So everybody in the village who ate that beef, now investigation is on. And who is involved? A member of the Union Cabinet of the Modi government. So the movement and the arms training they are giving to Bajrang Dal in Uttar Pradesh, elections early next year. So now again the communal polarization in Uttar Pradesh has already begun. In various parts the tensions are there. They are now talking of a Hindu migration out of attacks by Muslims. All concocted things are going to be put forward, and then on that basis a communal assault is being mounted. So whether it's the communal offensive, whether it's the authoritarian trend, or the neoliberal policies which are being taken forward with greater aggression than Manmohan Singh. And the recent US visit, he's gone there 4 times in the last 2 years. He's making up for the last 10 years when he did not get a visa, a Prime Minister. Now 4 times he's gone, but what did he do in the last visit? We cemented India as a junior strategic partner of US imperialism in the world. USA has given us the status of a major defense partner in South China Sea. Like the old Mughal rulers used to give mansabdaris, saying that you look after that area. India has been given that South China Sea looking after by US imperialism. And South China Sea is why? US imperialism wants to use India as a strategic partner in its global designs to contain China. So in all these areas you find that today, in terms of economic policy, foreign policy, communal offensive and authoritarianism, a situation developing in the country which is conducive for their achievement of the Hindu Rashtra. But does all this mean that we are now living under fascism? Has fascism come? Not in the classic sense of what we talk of in Europe. Remember Georgy Dimitrov's analysis of fascism, till today the most scientific analysis of fascism in Europe, where he says fascism emerges for 2 reasons. A crisis in the ruling classes and the crisis in monopoly capital, and to overcome that crisis, the replacement of parliamentary democracy by a naked terroristic dictatorship. In India today, that replacement of parliamentary democracy, however undermining that is being done, that replacement of parliamentary democracy into an open terroristic dictatorship has not yet happened. Second, fascism emerges when there is a threat of the working class to take over the state and the ruling classes and capture. and the capitalist class, in order to avoid that situation from happening, resort to fascism by changing parliamentary democracy into an open terroristic dictatorship. That, in that sense, is not yet happened. But the conception of Hindu Rashtra is a fascistic concept. Conception of the Hindu Rashtra towards which they are moving is a fascistic concept and a fascistic situation. So we are not yet in fascism, but there is a movement towards fascism. And in that movement, all the fascistic methods are being used to perfection. Whether it's the Goebbels methods of propaganda, you tell a big enough lie, frequently enough it becomes the truth. That was the Goebbels formula. Either those things or various other methods that you find that the methodology is very, very chillingly similar to the period of the rise of European fascism. The question therefore is not to get embroiled in saying is this fascism or not fascism. The question today is stop this from becoming fascism. Are we in a position to stop this or not? That will determine whether this idea of India that we are talking of can actually be realized or not. And if you have to stop this and realize this idea of India that we are talking of, an idea which we have, I think, summed up, and it's there on the flyer of this conference, is that what I have defined it as the drawing in of the exploited majority of rural India, the drawing in of all socially oppressed people, especially those who continue to be subjected to obnoxious caste-based oppression and atrocities, the drawing in of the numerous linguistic nationalities and the drawing in of the multi-religious Indian population, above all, the drawing in of all Indians in an inclusive path of economic and social justice, constitutes the core of this inclusionary idea of India. This remains unfulfilled. The struggles for realizing this, which is, I think, the theme of this EMS Smriti this year, is that what is the agenda that we have to undertake to realize this? Yes, the agenda is this overall canvas that I spoke of. But within then, to narrow it down amongst many other issues that must be taken up, is first a relentless campaign against this communalism and the conception of Hindu Rashtra, not merely in terms of theoretically combating it, but in terms of taking this and the dangers of this to the people through active people's programs to impact upon the social consciousness of the people. That is an important element in today's context. Because remember, communalism does not only disrupt national unity, it does not only put minorities and their security in jeopardy. Communalism also prevents, inhibits the advance, the progressive revolutionary advance in India, because communalism divides the unity of those very classes, the most exploited classes, which are the bedrock, whose unity is the bedrock for revolutionary change. Communalism in that sense, unless that is weakened or defeated, revolutionary advance in India is not possible. That is one element of the agenda. Second one is to, what I spoke now, recognize the caste class overlap in India, and along with economic exploitation, to take the issues of social oppression as instruments of people's struggles, and they need to be strengthened. Thirdly, the struggles for ensuring the existing constitutional directive of equality for all, irrespective of what, like the Constitution says, irrespective of caste, creed or sex, unquote. Unless this struggles to ensure this are not advanced, that is, championing the interests of the minorities, defending the interests of the religious minorities, and on that basis, ensuring this equality is implemented. And fourthly, to unify the various social and social movements that today exist on multifarious issues, which are all very important, ranging from environment to the question of children's rights, to the question of old age pension, to the question of gender. All these movements that are there today, which are seeking equality of the people in our country, we need to work towards coalescing all of that. And in that coalescing of these movements, on that basis, to mount first the defense of India as it exists today, and then to realize the idea of India as we talked about. So I think that is the task before all of us, and each one of us, whether the CPIM or the CPI, all of us are acutely conscious of this importance today. And in doing that, to build these people's struggles on basic issues, and on that basis to unite all the progressive and civil movements that are there in the struggle for realizing this idea of India. I think that is the agenda on the basis of which we'll have to move forward. So these, in a rather scattered fashion, I put these ideas together, saying that I think this is what constitute, at least these four elements should be basic to it, and there are many more, as I confess, there are many more aspects that need to come into this new agenda. But the new agenda has to focus on the issue of realizing this idea of India that we've spoken about, that is the inclusive unity of all Indians in the struggle for creating a better India. And that, I think, would be the biggest, in a sense also, homage we can pay to Comrade EMS. Remember, we have now entered the 70th year of the 1957 government. And the first instance for all of us, where in a capitalist country, in a bourgeois system, bourgeois parliamentary system, a communist party winning the elections in one state, and after that the progress that Kerala has made to be the highest in the human development indices in our country today, to EMS, who was one of the frontline leaders at that time and who symbolized this 1957 in his smriti, I think carrying forward this struggle on this idea of India on these lines, I think would be a very befitting homage. So thank you very much for this attention.
Thank you.